Hey Fight fans, I'm Sarah Davis and you're watching Fight News Now Extra. We have the latest from the Diaz brothers and Strikeforce next, so stay tuned for that and a chat with our MMA panel. Let's get to it. So if GSP says the super fight with Silva has to be on his terms, we might not see this bout happen for a while. However, another welterweight could be in the cards for Silva. Nick Diaz is coming off his suspension soon, and his manager, Gracie, thinks a Diaz-Silva fight is something the fans want to see.
We're pushing for the GSP fight. That's what we're going to push for, GSP or Silva. That's the two fights that interest us the most, and that's the ones we're going for. Their people are into it. We're into it. The fans, I think, would be into it. Got to convince Dana about it now. You know what I mean? Obviously, the fight that makes sense to them, and I don't disagree, is Anderson versus GSP. But let's get real. If GSP just absolutely says no, then what? You can't make a guy fight. And then if they wanted to promote a super fight and if the stars align, I mean, I think Nick would be into it. I think it'd be great.
Meanwhile, the younger Diaz brother, Nate, will be fighting for the lightweight championship when he takes on Ben Henderson at UFC on Fox 5. Nate recently said that he doesn't think he will win by decision because maybe he thinks the judges have it out for him and Nick. Anyways, he says he plans to finish the fight before it goes the distance. And over to Strikeforce, where middleweight Luke Rockhold has pulled out of his title defense against Larkin with a wrist injury. This prompted a flurry of angry tweets from Larkin, but Rockhold said he never actually signed a contract for the fight, even though Strikeforce was advertising it for their January card. Tisk tisk, Strikeforce. That's the latest news from the combat sports world. Now let's hear what our MMA panel has to say, and it's over to John Pollock, John Ramdeen, and Robin Black. And what's going on, guys?
Well, we are preparing for a funeral coming up on January the 12th, as Strikeforce is going to be buried 6 feet under in Oklahoma City, and it looks like no one is attending this funeral. Gilbert Melendez out, Luke Rockhold out. I predict that Daniel Cormier will get injured as well, and I am going to go with Nate Marquardt over Tarek Saffiedine to get injured as well on this card.
Yeah, I don't know about that. Fighters fight, that's what they want to do, and I don't think these guys are going to want to wait till the UFC takes over the organization. These guys want to get a paycheck, they want to impress because they want to fast track themselves to the top of whatever division they're fighting in. So I'd be surprised if there are any more
I don't think
injuries.
any fighter is gearing up for an injury, saying, you know what, wrist injury coming up
No,
next week. That's
right.
my goal.
That's right, but if Luke Rockhold says, I want to get a crack at Silva, it's best I pull out of this fight to impress when I get to the UFC. That's not a bad little strategy.
As is often the case, you are both right and you are both wrong. Definitely there are men out there. We can't name any of them by names because it's not reasonable. You know, we don't have insight into who they are and what they're thinking, but there are definitely men out there who would be thinking, you know what, this is a risk. If I lose this fight or perform really badly, maybe I don't go to the UFC, which has been my goal. There's definitely men out there. But there's also men out there who are like, I will fight anyone, anytime for money. Jordan Meehan, who fought last weekend, is one of these guys. He wants on that card. He just had the performance of a lifetime against Forrest Petts, just annihilated this guy, could naturally assume his next fight will be in the UFC. He's like, nah, I want to fight in that Strikeforce card. So there are guys on both sides.
Dana White is kind of lamenting this entire deal with Showtime and Strikeforce, hoping that it could have worked out somehow, and you know, they could have enjoyed a few more years of that lucrative Showtime money. But let's be honest here, his bread and butter is the UFC, and the UFC is that much stronger now with Strikeforce gone and importing a number of these guys. To me, I just don't get the concept of a promotion trying to run two satellite organizations and refusing any crossover, which is what Showtime really drew their line in the sand over.
But you honestly think that the UFC is now stronger after if they absorb this roster?
Absolutely.
You think they're going to get more pay-per-view buys, more people are going to tune into the UFC because Luke Rockhold and Gilbert Melendez are there? I completely disagree.
You're gaining Ronda Rousey? You're telling me that Gilbert Melendez in the lightweight division, you would rather see him still fighting the Pat Healey's of the world?
No, I'm not saying that, but
There's tons of great fights to be
That's right.
made.
But hardcore fans, they tuned into Strikeforce just like they tuned into the UFC. I really don't think you're going to get any more fans tuning into this product. I think that what you had was a product for the hardcore fans, and yes, you might have have had some crossover, but I think the most important thing was to try to deliver for these guys, and that's what we saw from the Strikeforce organization.
You're the one that complains about why are these people on a UFC main card? You're now just bolstering that with more guys that are quality guys coming over now.
One argument to be on Dana's side, or to be on the side of it would be great to keep Strikeforce around. There were times where Strikeforce would do 600,000 and 700,000 views, where the UFC on Fuel will do 100,000. So there are people out there that were consuming this product, you know, and that's something you just can't ignore.
I agree, and I think it came down to, yes, I understand what you're saying. In my opinion, there's a lot of guys in the UFC roster right now that maybe don't have the experience or they don't have the skill set because the UFC's need, and they're partners with Fox and the pay-per-views and whatnot, so they have to get these guys fighting. Well, you take Daniel Cormier, you take Gilbert Melendez, you take Josh Thompson, you take all the talent that the Strikeforce organization has, replace those maybe mediocre guys or less experienced guys with these skilled competitors, and use Strikeforce as a feeder organization. I think that would have made the most sense, but Zuffa and Showtime just simply couldn't agree.
Yeah, I mean, it's tricky, right? Because the UFC...
Is it really?
Well, when I tell somebody that I work in MMA, or I tell somebody that I am fighting in a cage, they go, oh, you're in the UFC? Oh, you work in the UFC? Like, most people don't have a clue that there is such a thing as MMA, and they're like, is that like a junior UFC? Like, they don't get it anyway. So with that in mind, the UFC's done this job of making, the same way that Xerox used to be what you called a photocopier and Kleenex used to be what you called tissue, the UFC is fighting.
Quick question as we end off here. For the champions that are absorbed into the UFC, are they recognized as champions coming in and we potentially get some champion versus champion fights? I don't think that's going to happen at 185, but lightweight.
If it's relevant. You use it for Gilbert Melendez, and you make a huge deal out of the fact that Gilbert Melendez was the Strikeforce champion. For everybody else, if it fits, you use it. I mean, there's really no rules whatsoever. You become like Dana White as a promoter, and the whole organization just kind of does whatever works and sells stuff. And I think we all know that.
I think use it because, you know, if it sells, if it creates interest, the UFC needs all the help they can get, especially with so many fighters.
Junior Dos Santos, Dion Staring. Here we go.
Who knows? You never know what's going to happen in MMA, right?
You never do, Sarah.
All right, well, what I do know is that we're going to have one of John Ramdine's most favorite movies on Fight Network starting next Thursday. We're kicking off our FN movie series, and we're starting off with Fight Club. You know, that's the movie with Brad Pitt, Edward Norton, the Underground Fight Club. It starts at 9 p.m. Eastern, and that's Thursday, December 6th, so don't miss it. Coming up next, we have more Fight News Now Extra.